I went into the forest because I need the silence. Not the kind you get at 3 in the morning with a neighbor's TV bleeding through drywall, but the kind that feels like snow on the tongue, cold, clean, empty. I parked at the gravel pull-off, shouldered my pack, and stepped into a green that swallowed the car noise in 3 breaths. The trailhead register box had a warped lid and a pencil attached by string. I wrote my name and the date like a little prayer to the world. Someone knows I exist. The trees were tall and straight, stitched with lichen, the ground a soft matters of needles, and damp leaf long gone to brown. I kept my peace lazy enough to hear water somewhere to my left and the mild tap of small cones falling to the dove like a clock that didn't care what hour it struck. By late afternoon, I found a flat rise overlooking a creek braided in 3 strands, the water glittering between stones. I set the tent on pine duff and staked it against a wind that didn't exist yet. The air was sweet with sap and the hush of a place that had forgotten roads. When the sun settled and the forest changed keys, I boiled water, ate from a pouch that tasted faintly like a cardboard and smoke, and felt the narrow satisfaction of a simple life, a circle of light, a dry place to sleep, the sound of water like a living heartbeat. For a while I thought about nothing, that was the goal. The second night bent differently. The dark arrived as a polished thing, deep enough to hide the horizon, and the creek's whisper thickened into something like static. I woke a few hours later with the note in my chest that I get when an alarm is about to go off, only 3 was no alarm. There were whispers instead, not words, more like breath learning to be words. They braided with the water noise, wrote the needles, edged around the tent, fly as if peering in. I lay very still and told myself it was wind riffled through branches in a way my city ears didn't understand. The whispers ebbed and I slept again, but it was a shallow sleep, the kind where the body never really lets go of the brakes. Morning apologized in gold. Then I found the tracks, not deep, not perfect, ovals and crushed leaf in a faint ring around my tent, as if something had paced me while I snored. I reached for the compass to reorient myself, and the needle spun without landing. I tapped the plastic, it jittered, settled, then swung again, aimless. When I glanced at the food bag, one of the sealed pouches gutted like a fish. I told myself a raccoon had teeth like tin snips and that the ring of prints belonged to it. I packed all the same, kinched down everything I cared to keep, and pointed myself toward the trail. Except I couldn't find it. The forest had folded the path back into itself overnight, and the blaze I was sure I'd memorized had paled to ordinary bark. I wasn't worried, not at first. The creek ran west, and west would speed me toward the forest road eventually, so I kept it to my left and moved through sunlight over rotting windfall with words whistling, punchlines I didn't get. But the creek forked and my west turned north without telling me, and by noon the light was different, the trees denser and the air heavier like damp cloth. A cold knuckle began pressing between my shoulders. I stopped for water and checked the phone even though I knew there'd be no bars. There were none. The battery indicator still wore its polite green smile. I packed it and walked. The afternoon my footsteps learned to edit themselves to place each foot on something friendly. Every sound earned attention. A limb creaked and my scalp tried to lift off. Something crashed through brush for upslope, and I learned 30 names for the same fear. It is astonishing how the body contains the animal it pretends to transcend. I wasn't thinking in words anymore, not really. I was thinking in heat and shadow and angle of ground. I told myself, keep water to the left, mark the sun by the shoulder, stay moving. And still, The feeling grew that I had entered a place that didn't recognize me as a temporary visitor, but as a piece of its own hunger. I made camp on a low bench above the creek, a smaller one now, the sound more narrow, like a whispered raw teeth. I ate sparingly, shrank the food, and built no fire, because flame felt like calling my name into a canyon. Twilight held for a long time, and then it didn't. The dark here was not the dark of city power outages. This was the dark the world had before names. The whispers returned. At first I thought it was the creek splitting around a rock, the soft complaint of current. But they had redeemed a pattern that learned me. I lay with my eyes open and the fabric of the tent moved, as if a breath pushed against it. It could smell something that was not animal, old stone in wet shadow, or a cellar where apples were once stored and forgot to rot. The circle of prints I'd seen in the morning visited my mind like a stain. I forced my breath slow, and the whispers flattened, then rose again, closer, almost a mouth against the nylon. My own name dreaded the sound, or I put three because fear wanted a shape. Sleep took me like a thief, and when I woke the light felt wrong. The tent door zipper was 3 inches open though I remember it shut. Pine needles had blown inside, and I told myself it was wind, a trick of slope, something boring. Outside, the food bag was on the ground, like the forest had offered it back. I touched it, and the line was cut with a clean edge that did not look like teeth. My compass needle spun obedient circles, faithful to nothing. I kept moving. To stop in a place with those whispers felt like volunteering myself to a story I didn't want told. By the third day, the map in my head was a tight circle. The creek to the left became a creek on both sides because there were braided channels everywhere. I crossed and recrossed on stones that slid under my boots. A dead elk lay below, a hemlock with its eyes already clean hollows. I tried not to make meaning of that. The light failed early, as if something had leaned between the sun and me. I walked a little farther, then was wise, and then a little farther still. And by the time I realized I'd done something stupid, I could not find any flat ground. I crashed raw huckleberry to a narrow shelf I would have judged poor in any other mood. I judged it perfect by a new scale. It did not pitch me into a ravine. The night the whispers stopped pretending to be water. They arranged themselves, looped and unlooped, and so I could not pull words for them. I could feel the direction of meaning. I remembered that circle of prints and imagined them around me now. Just on the edge of the tent light, I took the knife from the pocket of my pants and laid it next to my dial like a dream of control. Something brushed the tent again. The fabric flexed inward and held for a heartbeat, as if a forehead leaned against it. I could hear the damp in the breath. An old, patient smell slid under the door's tiny gap. My mouth dried out in an instant, and my tongue felt like a leaf. I did not scream, I did not run, I did not move at all. I lay as still as an egg, and imagined bones as a cage that kept me inside my fear. The pressure on the tent lifted, the whispers rose into something like wind, then were wind, and then a coyote cut the dark with a note so lonely I felt it under my ribs. Eventually, the world thinned into a gray that might have been dawn or mercy. I crawled out and scanned the ground. The needles around the tent woke a mass of crushed place, the kind the night leaves when it lands too close. I did not know what left them. I pretend I did. Hunger found me fully on the fourth morning. My head felt like a bell someone had forgot to stop ringing. I counted food, pooches, and did math that did not end well. I ate half of a whole that should have been quartered, and I hated myself and loathed myself for it. The creek tasted like a promise that would not to be kept. I moved along it anyway, telling the water to show me the road. I could feel a long slope under my feet now, a change in a geology, and part of me rejoiced because change means progress. Another part remembered that not all changes are exits. Around noon, I found a structure. It was not a cabin with a cheerful porch. It was a low rectangle sunk into the ground, stone walls swathing and stitched with root, a timber door half submerged in silt like the forest had tried to bury it and failed. I should have made a wide arch and never looked back, but the logic of the lost, it cruelly simple. A human thing means a way out. I pulled on the iron ring. The door lit with a sigh that felt rehearsed. The air that rolled out had the damp sweetness of cellars and the cold of old iron. My light, thin as it was, fell on steps and a tight corridor whose walls were close enough to touch with both elbows. Inside there was no furniture, no tools, no sign of a purpose. Space was a rib cage of earth with a spin of stone. It carved sound delicately and returned it in thinner versions, as if the air were trying to learn my voice. At the far end, the corridor turned and widened to a room with a ceiling low enough to flatten posture. On the floor lay a scatter of objects arranged with the patience of someone who had too much of it. A compass with a cracked face, a blank fork, a child's shoe must groan to the laces, a coil of blue twine. My stomach signed its name on the inside of my skin, and my head filled with air. I backed out as carefully as a person can who is trying not to wake a sleeping thing. Outside, the forest looked brighter than it had 10 minutes earlier, and that brightness felt wrong, like a staged photograph. I closed the door and rolled a stone against it that would not stop anyone or anything that wanted in or out. I put 20 paces between me and the door, then 40, then 100. The trees shouldered each other tightly, and the light went cool and then colder. The whispers were gone again, and in their absence I heard something worse, a hush that felt like holding a breath that had no lungs behind it. Evening landed. I found a little amphitheater of stone, hung the food I had, and nested the tent into a cradle of ferns. I did not sleep. I drifted in place like a leaf on black water. Somewhere in the night a sound started, light as thought, the hush of fabric over bark, and a tap, tap, tap that matched the pace of a walking person counting in their head. I lay there while it circled. It did not press against the tent this time. It did not touch anything. It only marked distance on a loop around me until the idea of round became a shape. I could see with my closed eyes an unbroken ring. In the morning there were prints again, clean this time, the ovals deeper, spaced with a gait that would have been human if it were not so careful. Where my tent had sat, someone had left 3 small stones stacked like a child's monument. I started talking to myself that day, not in words I can't recount now, but in broken encouragements and orders. Drink, step west. I tried the phone and saw the battery nearly gone. I turned it off to save the last bars of charge, as if I might need them to call a silence. My stomach cramped with a curious mix of need and dread, like being too close to the edge of a high balcony. My world became radius and diameter. How wide I could scan before panic tilted me off my feet. The forest was a repetition machine. Everywhere looked like where I had been except it wasn't, and each tree wore 10 faces depending on the light. Near dusk I found a cairn, a proper trail cairn, or what had once been one, softened by moss, scattered a little. Beside it, a slice of aluminium with the suggestion of red paint. I knelt and touched it, and it flaked under my finger like pastry. Relief landed in the body place where tears begin. I followed the cairn's vague line to another and another, each more uncertain, and then to a place where they ended against a boulder like a sentence abandoned mid-world. Beyond, the ground tilts down, and the forest grew younger, saplings thick with an eagerness that hid old stumps, like knuckles under grass. In that tangle the whispers come again, not around me this time, but ahead, as if the forest itself were trying to draw me along, an invisible hand at my back. I obeyed, that is the truth of it. I let the sound lead. I drove me to a hollow where the air lay cooler than the ridge. I left, and in the hollow was the black circle of a pond, so still it carried the trees on its skin like a second forest turned upside down. The surface was clean, too clean. No algae bloom, no insects, scribbling their brief biographies. I walked to the edge and saw my face in a smudge of sky, thinner than I remembered. Eyes dilated to swallow light. The whispers brushed my ears like hair. I don't know why I stepped closer. Hunger has so many forms, and some of them look like curiosity. The first thing I saw in the water was not mine. It was a rectangle of color ghosted at the bottom. My heart miscounted. I leaned with both hands on my knees and squinted into the dark and understood. A license plate still bright with the stubborn optimism of its paint. Around it, angles that were not rock. I saw the curve of a fender, a tooth of chrome, a door handle with a suggestion of a handprint where no hand could be known. Cars do not arrive in ponds easily, not out here. Things bring them, or the ground gives way and swallows. The whispers became pressure at the base of my skull, as if fingers pressed through bone. I stepped back. The pond did not ripple. Even my breath felt like an offense in that place. I slept high that night, on a ridge where wind worried the treetops and made enough honest noise to drown the small lies of the ground. The rain come again, footsteps describe a circle that did not falter. In the morning I found another stack of 3 stones and a length of blue twine, the same impossible, cheerful color as the coral in the underground room. I left it where it lay. I understood without understanding that this was how the forest said hello back, by arranging pieces of me and of others into little altars I had not asked for. The next day I chose a plan. I hated climb until I could see something more than green and then drop on the better side. Up means heat and the age of heights and a kind of vertical panic. But it also meant ages, and every age is way to measure yourself against something. I climbed until the trees, thinner than sky opened like a lid, until calcified sunlight hammered my shoulders and the wind stripped sweat from my face. On the spin of the ridge a fire had come years ago and left blackened teeth, and through those teeth the world finally showed its map. I saw valleys stitched with dark, another ridge layered behind this one, and in the far distance a line that might have been the lodging road if I wanted it to be. I set it in my head like a compass rose and started down toward it, with the bright and terrible knowledge that falling is easier than climbing, and that easy is sometimes a trap. The descent chewed my shins and lungs, and the daylight leaked away faster on this side, as if the sun had business elsewhere. Somewhere behind me the loop resumed, closer this time, not the ring around the camp, but a contour following my shoulder the way a shadow does at noon. I did not run. Running in a place like this is choosing a graceful way to break something. I kept a steady downhill pace and talked to the trees the way a person talks to a dog they are not sure is friendly. The forest replied with the creak of hung branch and the small chitter of a squirrel telling me I did not belong. Toward dusk the ground leveled and I stepped into a corridor where the trees had grown in 2 rows like the ribs of collapsed cathedral. At the far end, standing where the last light pooled, was a figure. It was not dramatic, it did not loom or glow. It stood with the patience of a thing that had never learned to hurry. Heights like mine, shoulders neither broad nor narrow, the suggestion of clothing that could have been bark or the idea of bark. Its face was where a face should be, and yet I could not hold it in my eyes. It slid like water does, refusing ages. I stopped and the breath went out of me in a sound that I would have called a laugh in any other life. The figure did not move. It held the place, and the place held me. We were items on a shelf, proper, thus settling in equal measure on both. I don't know how long we stood there, because time loses its shoes in a hallway like that. My legs trembled in little rhythms that had nothing to do with cold. Eventually the figure turned, not a proper turn with a foot and a pivot, but a blur, like a cloud rearranging. In the space it had occupied showed me only more corridor. In that absence the whispers returned, thickened, then thinned, as if what had been in front of me had been the knotted core of them. I walked forward because standing still felt like building a house for my fear. At the place where the figure had stood, the ground held footprints, and the pine needles unbent slowly, as if they had been pressed until just then. Night did what night does. I found a low place and set the tent by feel. My hands shook in a way that made simple knots into puzzles. The food baked seemed absurd, the hanging ritual fragile. I slid into the tent and listened to a world made only of black and my own machine noises. Sleep didn't come. It arrived by carriage, late and formal, and when it did it was busy with dreams of stairwells that go down forever and doors that open onto doors. I woke with my trough as if I had been telling someone my name for hours. In the morning the world had a faraway brightness like looking at a photograph of daylight. I woke without eating. My body had discovered a cruel trick. Hunger quieted after a certain point and left only a hollow clarity. My mind sliced the day into goals, reached the deadfall, the white snag, the band where the fern patch thickens. At noon I put water in my mouth and let it sit until my body believed in it. The whispers came now in threads too faint to place. I wore them like cobwebs. When I reached the long, raw scar that I had seen from the ridge, hope jumped in my chest like a fish. It was road, or had been. Two ruts in baked earth, scabbed with grass, running straight as a rule, the raw young birch. I stepped into it, and the forest seemed to step back a pace in agreement, as if boundaries were comfortable for it too. I chose a spot where the ruts winded and stamped the tent stakes into a ground that didn't want to hold anything. The loop began almost immediately, the measured tread, the circle cut clean, and then a new sound. A fingernail dragged on fabric, slow enough to write letters. It did not move. I watched the shadow of the tent wall curve and uncurve. In a touch I recognized from the second night. There is a kind of terror that is just beneath louder. And I was there again, smiling in the dark with my teeth clenched, smiling in the dark with my teeth clenched. The drag stopped. A much softer sound replaced it, the click of small stones set on one another. Patient, precise. I crawled out at dawn. There was a tower of 5, taller than the others had been, built at the mouth of the tent, so I would have to knock it to leave. I did not knock it. I picked it apart one pebble at a time and set each back where I guessed it had lived before hands moved it. It felt like untying a knot in a thread that is also your lifeline. The road thickened with brush and fell away into a clearing where the skeleton of a gate lay fallen, its rusted hinge still mapped on one post. Beyond it, a rectangle of field went wheeled with goldenrod and milkweed, and beyond that a shape that could only be a building, small and square, with a roof slumped like a bedhead. I moved toward it with a caution that felt like reverence. It had been a ranger shed once, There were the ghosts of letters above the door where a sign had been scribbled in and later turned off. Inside the dust held old patterns of boots and mice and empty well of spool where a radio cable had been. In one corner a metal locker waited with a door bowed. I pried it with my knife, life like a human crow, and it yielded. Inside a first aid kit furred with mold, a flare gun with two rounds sealed in a wax, a plastic bag containing a folded map, and a small hand crank radio. The map was the kind you laminate against weather, a forgot under a seat for a decade. It smelled like long summers. The corners cracked when I unfolded, but the lines still spoke their names. Contour Creek Road. I found the ridge where the fire had been, the loop of pond black and round as an eye, the forgotten road stitched faintly like a scar, and there, not that far at all, the forest road that would meet real pavement. The flare gun felt like a miracle and a lie at the same time. I cranked the radio and it coughed static, then the ghost of a voice, then static again. I left it murmuring like company and ate the smallest meal I could and still call it eating. When the shadows turned, I packed the map like a relic and stepped back into the clearing. I made the road by late afternoon. The forest watched me do it. That is not madness talking, it is a simple accounting of attention. The trees stood where they stood, but the air had held quality, like an auditorium before the curtain. The whispers lay behind me in a folded sheet, not touching my ears, but close enough to chill the skin on the back of my neck. The road itself was only a brown stream of dirt, with two washed ruts, but it mean ages, and ages mean exists. I walked faster than I should have. Trip record told my knees they could fall later. The sky angled to gold, the air found that cold again, that taste like iron. At the last bend, the forest tired one more thing. The road narrowed as if to a throat, and on either side the young birch leaned in until their leaves touched overhead and made a tunnel of coin-sized light. In the center of that throat, the loop waited. No longer footsteps describing a circle, but a figure cut out of the light itself. The shape I had seen before, still as a hinge. I went cold and then hot, and then tired all at once. I stopped because stopping felt like the only honest movement left. The figure did not move. The whispers braided and unbraided themselves so quickly that words almost happened, and the word that almost happened was stay. I did not because I am brave, I am not, but because something older than my fear whispered back from a place in me that had teeth. No, I lifted that flare gun, and it felt like pointing a toy at a storm. I thumbed off the walks, aimed into the canopy to the right of the figure, and squeezed. The flare went up with a cough, and then it bloomed into a second sun that painted the birch with raw day. In that light the figure thinned, not dissolving, but revealing its age to be the idea of ages. It leaned, or the trees leaned, and the tunnel broke into separate trunks, and the coins of light became leaves again, and the road at the figure's feet was only road. The flare drifted and hissed and fell into long grass, where it died with a slug. I walked past the place where the figure had been. The air there was cooler by a degree I felt on my cheeks. The whispers went with me to the bend and then stayed, as if stitched to the patch of ground. When I turned, the tunnel was only trees, and the light on them was only evening. I kept walking until the brown rolled into gravel, and the gravel into grey, and the grey into the faint luxury of tire, noise miles, a way that sounded like a promise being kept. At the car, the world felt rude and blowed at once. I sat in the driver's seat with my hands on the wheel and realized I did not know what to do with Case anymore. Back home, the city's noise returned like weather. The first night I slept with the TV on because dialogue is kind of talisman. But in the thin hours, the air conditioner's hum braided into something softer, and the pipes knocked in the walls with a rhythm that remembered footsteps. I told myself it was habit, that the body learns the songs it needs and takes a while to forget them. I told myself I had left the forest. In the morning, I washed the dirt from the mat and laid it flat under books to press the creases out. A bit of blue twine fell from the folds and landed on the kitchen table in a neat coil. I let it sit there a long time, staring, while the refrigerator whispered my name.